What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with Age of Revelation and Rogue fighting Galactus. So, one of the things that I want to specify, and it was a question that a lot of you guys seem to have, Age of Revelation, the X-Men event right now, is not taking place in the present day. This takes place in the future. Now, it takes place at various points in the future. For example, this story starts off 7 years in the future, but then continues on to 9 and 10 years in the future. So, I just wanted to kind of specify that ahead of time. But what this does is it picks up with Rogue, and she just says, he's coming, right? And he's coming right for us. And then at that point, you switch over to a handful of different mutants. Dome, Temper, Ransom. And going through these guys, Temper is actually a girl named Edie, and she's been around since 2010, I think. She was created by Matt Fraction. Basically, she manipulates temperature, hence the reason why she has the code name Temper. But she just says, right, why target us, Rogue? Why not the Avengers, or whatever the hell is left of the Fantastic Four these days? And Ransom responds and says he's not after us, Temper. He must want Shavaric. Now, we'll talk about who Shavaric is here in a minute, because it goes into this really dope story called The Dark Artery. It was like Gail Simone's Southern Gothic horror story. It's a critically celebrated story. Everyone loves it. Like, it's a phenomenal story. We should cover it. But to focus on Ransom for a second, he's kind of like Gail Simone's modern day version of Sebastian Shaw meets Bishop, in the sense that much like Sebastian Shaw, Ransom can absorb basically kinetic energy and then turn it into physical strength. But that will likely change and expand over time, and he'll likely end up becoming a blend between Sebastian Shaw and Bishop, where instead of it just being kinetic energy, or literally punches, bullets, things like that, he'll be able to absorb energy itself and then turn that into a form of energy that he can fire back or heal himself or any number of things. Only time will tell if that's going to be the case. But Spider-Girl chimes in and says, like, we can't let him have her, right? Like, didn't you say that she has the power to enslave the world, right? And then she addresses Dome, and she says, I think this is your call, right? You're the last of the St. Juniors. It's your house. Now, Dome is a mutant with the ability to quite literally create force fields, hence her name. And she just says, like, I cannot look at him all at once, right? I don't know what to do, Spider-Girl. I really don't. And so that's where Rogue looks over at Gambit, and she just says, like, Remy, are you still with us? And he's like, yes. And this is kind of an important moment here, because for a lot of these guys who are around, even including Edie, a mutant who's been around for a little while, they don't really have the experience that Rogue and Gambit have, because Rogue and Gambit have been around for a very long time. They've taken all comers, and they've faced off against any variety of villains who are out there. And so that's why when a lot of these young kids are confronted with Galactus, they're paralyzed with fear here. And it's one of these things that's kind of crazy, because they don't quite know how to handle it. And so Rogue says, right, I've seen Galactus before a few times. It's a miserable experience being paralyzed with fear. Ransom, you're the leader. Is it fight or flight? It's what you're good at. Lead us. And so he just says, right, there are 1,000 tormented living in the underground city of PENUMBRA, and a cosmic mutant guarding them who hates all living things. Again, that feeds in the Dark Artery as well. We'll talk about that. And so they kind of go back and forth here, right? You know, Temper says that if he sets them all free, the tormented will rip all mutants to shreds. Of course, Dome fires back, and she says, guys, I think that I'm too scared to think, which makes sense when you're facing against Galactus. And so Ransom asked the question, right, what if we set Shavaric free? Like, what if we do that? And the risk here is that they bring ruin to the entire world, right? Everybody dies instantly, right? Shavaric will kill everyone. And that's even where, like, Sentinel Boy's like, I mean, the cure would be worse than the disease if we did that. And so Rogue kind of muses for a second. She's like, I've chased the idea of being a hero for a good long time now, and I think this is that moment. And she just says, I have an alternative. You guys go, I will stay. And you get this really, really beautiful moment. It's almost kind of like the inverse, right? With Gambit and Rogue in X-Men 97, except this time it's Rogue and Gambit, in the sense that Rogue is the one that's getting ready to presumably sacrifice herself, right? She says, Remy, my love, the youngest ones, they've got a whole ass life ahead. And there's the baby. Go. Please. Now, for those of you guys who have not been following the story of Rogue and Gambit for quite some time, they've been married for a while in Marvel Comics, right? Like, Gambit finally got to clap the cheeks. But for real and for true, right? He put a ring on it, the two of them been married. There was a really, really great comic that was just a team up with Rogue and Gambit when they were married. It was amazing. Like, it was absolutely phenomenal. And so seeing his wife kind of preparing to sacrifice herself is really something Gambit's not ready for. And he's like, I've been with a lot of you. you. And one thing I know for sure, you're not very good at following orders. Chelsea, can you make a dome to stop that thing for a moment? And she's like, stop him? I mean, I could try, but I mean, this is Galactus we're talking about here, right? I mean, this would be a stopgap measure for seconds at best. And that's where Gambit just says, Butterscotch, all I've got are some cards and a stick. Try it, right? Like, please give it a shot. And so Ransom's like, okay, so like, what do we have that he might hate, right? We have 2 energy absorbers, and he's all about energy. If the rest can slow him down, and that's where Rogue kind of cuts him off, right? Got it. Slow him down, take him out. And so at that point, she just kisses Gambit and just says, do not go underestimating the power of that stick, Cajun. And he just tells her, you come back, right? That's the only thing you have to do. Come back. And so Rogue flies up there to confront Galactus, and everybody else is basically going to offer some measure of a distraction. Now, as you can imagine, I mean, there's no conceivable way this is going to work, right? I mean, this is Galactus. This guy consumes worlds. He's a cosmic entity. His very presence spells doom for whatever world he shows up to, unless the inhabitants of those worlds somehow manage to get their hands on an ultimate nullifier, right? When Galactus shows up, you die, and that's just the way that it is. And so Rogue just says, right, he's ignoring me, like I'm not even here, or like it doesn't matter that I'm here. What is it that he wants? And then he speaks to her and says, I seek a new herald. And she's just like, holy crap, right? Like, it's talking to me. And she's like, do you mean Shavaric? And he says, no, not the mouth of darkness, her. I will have her. And he points to Dome and he just says, do not resist. Here she is nothing. As my herald, the universe is hers. And Rogue is just like, not a chance. Like, she's not nothing now, and she's never been nothing. And so in that moment, Rogue touches Galactus. And for the first time in Marvel Comics, this is huge. It's a very easy moment to overlook, but when you know Rogue's history, you know how big it is. We have never seen Rogue touch a cosmic entity like this and absorb their power. That's never happened, right? Like, the closest you ever got to something like this was Rogue touching the Hecatomb, right, from the Shi'ar Empire, and absorbing something like, what was it, like 8 billion minds at once, and it just sent her into a catatonic state, right? Something like that. That's the closest you ever got, right? But she says, here's what he doesn't know. At least I don't think. I've been getting stronger as I age. The reverse of entropy, I guess. I always hold a little something back. Not this time. I've been lucky, but I know that I'm not going to survive this. I'm sorry, Remy. I am sorry. And Rogue dies, right? It's just like, in that moment, she touches him. And like, that's the end of Rogue, or at least it seems to be the case. Because at that moment, there's just kind of huge explosion of energy of sorts, right? And Gambit's looking around, checking to make sure that all the younger kids are okay. And then he's just told by Ransom, right? Like, do not turn around, do not look. But Gambit does. And he sees something that we don't immediately get. Instead, what he says here is he says, she's gone, and she left that reminder. And every day since, I just about wanted to die. And I don't mean it like a poet. You need to understand that. Everyone came for the wake. Of course they did. It was for Anna Marie. With me, my eyesight started to go sour, and people came to visit less. I guess I went sour too. And I know that I'm no fit company. I want to laugh. I want to be Gambit again. I just plumb forgot how. He says, it's time. Every night around 9 o'clock, I talk with her. I can't see her anymore, and I know that they all worry. But even 3 years later, it's the only time I feel less broken. And so he looks out the window, and there's Rogue, literally in the form of Galactus, as just a giant stone figure, essentially sacrificing her life to save everybody. And he says, my beautiful wife that I cannot see anymore, my once-in-a-lifetime passion that I cannot touch. I am forgetting what her laughter sounded like. She stands here, unmoving and unmovable, a 60-foot-tall statue in my backyard. No heartbeat, no brain activity. She's dead. I know that, but she also is still here. Friends told me to move on, and I asked them, how? Like, it's tragic. It's crushing. Like, it's one thing to like look at the history of Gambit and Rogue and just be like, okay, so like clearly Rogue's the girl that Gambit is always chasing, and there's kind of like the cat and mouse game, and like throughout the entirety of the 80s and the 90s, and even going into like the 2000s, right? It's the will they, won't they, right? For like 30 years in Marvel Comics, right? Will Gambit get Rogue? Will Rogue end up going to Gambit? Like, will they ever end up together? And they finally did. And it's not until you start to experience that history in its totality, right? Reading the X-Men comics from the introduction of Gambit all the way up to when he and Rogue got married, that you realize how much love was there. And like that, in the blink of an eye, she's gone forever. And it's just this crushing feeling for Gambit, because he says, I miss her, but I find it helps if I talk to her, right? He's grieving, right? And so in talking to Rogue, he says, Nightcrawler called. He asked if I wanted to pray with him for you. I figured it wouldn't hurt any, so I gotta say, I do feel a little bit better after. He says, I wasn't really expecting that, right? He did some research, wants me to go to grief counseling, all the hell in the world, and he still takes time to worry about my soul. We're still getting cards and letters. People grateful that you stopped Galactus. From all over the world, people are sending these cards and letters. You're remembered. It's the only thing that keeps me going some days. On my blackest days, I'd wish we'd never met. I'd be alone, but I wouldn't have this hole inside of me. And he says, someday, maybe soon, right? Talking about the idea of joining her. And there's truth to that statement, right? Sometimes there are instances where you lose a love that means so much to you that the statement, it is better to have loved and lost than to have never loved at all, has no meaning. It is not even the slightest bit true. It just gets transformed into this platitude, right? A thing that people just say in order to kind of help you feel better and to make themselves feel better about at least trying to do something to help you feel better. But like in the case of Gambit and Rogue, in his mind, right, if he had never met her, he wouldn't feel this pain. But the other side of that coin, and it's the side that grief oftentimes prevents you from believing, it's the fact that there were so many beautiful moments between the time you met them and the moment they died. You had every wonderful moment in the world, right? The highest highs and the lowest lows. It's just because of the depression that comes with grief, focusing on the lowest lows is all you really tend to focus on. And so Gambit continues on. He says, I don't say the darkest thing, not out loud, that I'm just waiting for a day when I can lay my burden down and I can stop running against the wind. That blessed day when we're together again. I'm so tired, darling wife. I feel like I'm at the bottom of the ocean somehow. It is so emotional. This is why Gail Simone is such a phenomenal writer for the X-Men line, because she's been doing it for a long time, right? Deadpool breaking the fourth wall, for example. Like, you could thank Gail Simone alongside Christopher Priest for picking that up after Joe Kelly when he did it a couple times in the old Deadpool comics. But Gail Simone has been around for a long time, and she still got it, man. And so it's one of these things where at that point, you switch to Atlantis, right, near the Western Continental Shelf, and you just have these two Atlanteans. Now, we do get some context about what's going on in the world right now, because for those of you guys who haven't necessarily been following all of this, one of the big things that's taken place during Age of Revelation is that, as we mentioned in the previous video, that Douglas Ramsey, Cypher, had basically unleashed a virus onto the world that is not only functioning akin to the legacy virus, right, where it basically turns humans into monsters, it kills some humans, it activates powers in mutants, it kills some mutants, it's terraforming the planet as a whole. So it's a pretty bleak future for the entirety of Earth. But one of the things we're also learning here is that the Atlanteans are in a war with the Latvian army, which is kind of nuts, right? It's taking the history between Namor and Doctor Doom and seemingly flipping it on his head, assuming that both of these guys are leading wars against one another. They could both be dead. We just don't necessarily know if that's the case or not. But one of the things they're doing is they're following protocol, right? One of the guys says, like, let's go up. Protocol says, we check for a heartbeat. That's where the other guy says, like, that's what I mean, right? It never changes. It's the same every check. And he says, we keep this up and I'll have to check for my own heartbeat. Again, kind of a little banter between them. And the other guy says, well, still nothing, no response, no sign of life. Put it in the log. Right? And then just ultimately they take off, only for us to find out the body they're checking is Galactus, right? And so we're told over 1,000 days he has lain here. He has been pushed back in the past. He's been nullified. He's been repelled temporarily. He has never been laid so low. Vegetation and sea life clamber on his body. They nest in the plains of his armored flesh, and he is oblivious to all. He is a being of energy, sustenance we cannot comprehend. And she took that from him. Of course, Rogue. There are cultures in the universe who worship him as a living, consuming god, as vital and powerful a force as whatever sun they lived under. But that god is gone. Or so it seemed. A tiny spark, a flint in the darkness, briefly shimmers, modulating in the deep sea current, and that spark finds a willing recipient. Because Shavaric is the person who is essentially receiving what seems to be the life spark of Galactus. Now, let's jump into the Dark Artery. Let's kind of explain how all that ties into what's going on here. Because without that, you couldn't possibly hope to understand everything that comes next. So what goes on is that Gambit talks about this, right? He says the city of New Orleans, they felt she deserved a tribute of some kind. There's no use in a statue. She was already a statue herself. And so it was decided, a stone with an engraving, understated, just one word, meant to be kind, and it was meant to inspire, right? That word being unbreakable. And he says, I wish, right? I wish it was true. And so that's where the son of Ransom and Temper comes running out and telling Gambit that Henrietta is in their kitchen. Now, who's Lady Henrietta, right? Lady Henrietta is amazing. Like, she's phenomenal. One of the coolest characters out there in recent memory and introduced in the Dark Artery storyline. Her powers are very similar to Emma Frost in the sense that instead of turning into diamond, she kind of turns into obsidian, but she is essentially the guardian of something called the Penumbra. And the way that was explained in the Dark Artery, and kind of switching over here for a second to Uncanny X-Men number 13, the explanation goes like this. She says, there was a woman a long time ago, one of our kind. Greta was her name. She was blessed with two gifts, the power to create curses, to bind the wicked, and a beautiful daughter who she loved more than the stars. Her husband was a pious man. He hectored the girl for her own gifts. He feared his wife, but he could not bully her, so he tormented his own child until she could no longer bear it. And so Greta created the Penumbra, a hellish prison, a mockery of a community that exists outside geography, to punish those kin of mutants who betrayed their own family members. If a father branded his daughter a witch, he came here. If a mother informed the constable on her husband, she came here, to their eternal regret and unending torment. And so quite literally, the Penumbra is just a hellish landscape. It's a place of torment for those individuals who betray their own family who are mutants. It's one of the coolest introductions to the X-Men lore in recent memories. That's why I say Uncanny X-Men is dope in Marvel Comics right now. But the reality here is that those individuals who are housed within there, those humans who suffer in Penumbra, are basically referred to as the tormented. They're basically the vengeful dead. And so when Gambit shows up here and he talks to Henrietta, kind of jumping back to this Unbreakable X-Men comic, he asks, right, Miss Henrietta, and she just says, Remy, I am so sorry for your loss. She's like, we have a special spot for Miss Rogue when she is ready. Surrounded by obsidian, it's as beautiful as she was. And she says, I'm afraid I am not fully presentable. I don't really socialize much, and I fear that I'm not fit for indoors. And at that point, Gambit just says, Itty, right, would you go to my room and pick something from my wife's armoire? Right, something very pretty, please. And so it allows them to kind of have a conversation about what all's going on, why it is that Lady Henrietta is here in the first place. And so what she says is, as you all know, the memorial grounds that I guard, the Dark Artery, they also guard a terrible place just below, where a monster, a god really, watches over the unliving humans who betrayed the mutants in their own family. And she says, Shavaric, right, she's been a slumber the past few years. Something awakened her. I fear I lack the strength to hold her, and she's angry. And so in that moment, while this explanation is going on, the tormented immediately start invading the house, right? Just all these humans who have been tortured due to their actions in betraying their own family. And they kind of speak broken, right? They speak in a pretty unclear way, right? Suffered enough, too much, decades too much, your turn to suffer, right? Different things like that, only to find out that they effectively have an infestation of sorts. And so at that moment, everybody jumps on the offensive, right? Gambit jumps on the offensive, but notice this, Gambit almost kind of toes this line between being ready to be done with all his living and continuing to fight. But it's also the kind of things that the tormented say that raise a few questions here, right? That one of the things that happens when Gambit says says, right, you stay away from my family, they start saying things like the giant, the girl, your wife, we'll burn her, bury her in pieces. And Gambit just asks, right, like, you stay away from her. And they say, won't, suffer forever, like us, right? Already doing it. So it's this idea, right, that Gail Simone kind of seems to be throwing out there that while Rogue's physical form is essentially dead, she's being tortured down in the penumbra. That's one way to interpret this. It could also be that there was some kind of betrayal on Rogue's behalf. Now, we know that her family kind of betrayed her when it turned out that she was a mutant, so there were all kinds of issues that went on with her history that developed trust problems and things like that. And so potentially her dad is down there somewhere. But the fact is, Gambit just says, right, like, if you go near her, if you even look her way, Gambit will bury all of you for real. And he means it, man. When Gambit gets pissed, it is a sight to behold. It's one of the coolest things. Because in turn, Gambit just runs out of the house, right? And just says, you all stay, protect the boy. I have to go, and I have to be with her. And they just tell him, right? Like, there's too many, right? You can't run out there. Like, they're all going to kill you. But Gambit says, right? I heard them crawling in the dirt. Only Gambit knows something that they don't seem to realize. And he says, hey, Deadens, we're outside now, and you all can go straight back to hell. Because Gambit wasn't running out there in order to, like, get himself killed. Gambit was going out there because he needed breathing room, right? You know, like, somebody call an ambulance. But not for me. Right? It's one of the funniest things because he says, I wanted to join you, wife. Now I see why I was left behind. The whole world has gone to dirt. Shavaric is trying to get loose. I cannot let that happen. With my last breath, I'm going to stop her. And then I'm going to be with you forever. So it's kind of like the life and death of Gambit, because this being a story in the future, we could see Gambit die here, right? So again, it's a phenomenal story. I love the way that Gail Simone writes the X-Men. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments section. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a like. Make sure you hit the subscribe button. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.